Hello, it's great to have you here. If you enjoy thrilling romances, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. The sun over the Montana Territory was a merciless, brassy eye in a bleached blue sky. It beat down on the column of 20 blue-coated cavalrymen, turning the sweat on their brows to salt and their woolen uniforms into personal ovens. Sergeant Arthur Bernard felt the familiar grit of dust between his teeth, a taste as constant as the creak of saddle leather and the jingle of spurs. He rode with a straight back, his gaze sweeping across the undulating plains and the distant, hazy peaks of the Wolf Mountains. His face, weathered by years of service under that same unforgiving sun, was a mask of professional calm, but beneath it, his soul was tired. They were deep in Lakota land, a place where the wind itself seemed to whisper warnings, and every shadow could conceal a warrior. The tension was a living thing, coiling in the guts of the younger troopers and hardening the jaws of the veterans. It was General Chester's new policy that had them all on edge. "Aggressive patrols, Sergeant," he had barked, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Show the hostiles we are not afraid to tread where we please." But Arthur knew the difference between courage and foolishness, and this felt dangerously close to the latter. Worse than the recklessness was the general's other standing order, a decree that soured the very notion of brotherhood. No man slows the unit. He who falls, stays. The words were a betrayal of the cavalry's unwritten code, a cold calculation that placed speed above a soldier's life. Arthur had seen the fear it put in the men's eyes. A wound, once a mark of battle to be tended by comrades, was now a potential death sentence signed by their own commander. He despised the order, a quiet, burning resentment he kept locked behind his disciplined expression. He was a soldier, and a soldier followed commands, but he was a man first, and the order was an offense to his humanity. He shifted in his saddle, his eyes catching the nervous tick in the jaw of the private riding beside him, a boy from Ohio barely old enough to shave. Arthur offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a simple gesture. "Stay sharp. We watch each other's backs, no matter what the generals say." The attack came with the sudden, terrifying scream of a hawk. It wasn't a hawk. The sound was ripped from a human throat, a war cry that seemed to erupt from the very earth. From a shallow, brush-choked coulee to their right, warriors materialized as if from thin air. The world exploded into a maelstrom of chaos. Gunshots cracked, arrows hissed through the air with the sound of tearing silk, and the panicked whinny of horses mingled with the shouts of men. Arthur's training took over. He drew his Colt, his voice a roar of command cutting through the din. "Skirmish line, to the right. Dismount and form up. Return fire!" He swung his leg over his mount, landing hard on the parched ground, his horse a trembling wall of flesh beside him. He saw a warrior, his face painted in streaks of black and red, rise over a crest of rock, bow, drawn taut. Arthur fired, the Colt bucking in his hand. The warrior fell. There was no time for triumph, no time for remorse. Another target appeared. The air grew thick with gun smoke and the coppery scent of blood. The Lakota were magnificent fighters, fluid, fierce, and utterly in their element. The troopers, trained for open field charges, were caught in a deadly close-quarters brawl. He saw the boy from Ohio go down, an arrow sprouting from his chest, his eyes wide with a final shocked surprise. A wave of fury washed over Arthur. He pushed forward, firing, reloading with practiced speed, trying to rally his men into a cohesive defense. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Then a searing, white-hot pain erupted in his left thigh. It felt as if a branding iron had been slammed into his flesh. He grunted, stumbling, but refused to fall. He fired again. Another agony, sharp and blinding, tore through his side, just below his ribs. This one stole his breath. The world tilted, the blue sky and brown earth swapping places in a dizzying spin. His fingers went numb, his grip on the Colt slackened, and the revolver fell into the dust. He crashed to the ground, the impact jarring every bone in his body. His horse, panicked and bleeding from a gash on its neck, shrieked and bolted. Arthur tried to push himself up, his vision blurring. He could see boots, flashes of blue and buckskin, a chaotic dance of death, and then he felt himself sliding, the dry, rocky soil giving way beneath him. He was rolling, tumbling down a steep, short embankment, scraping his face and hands on sharp rocks before coming to a jarring halt in a thicket of sagebrush at the bottom of a shallow ravine. Above him, the sounds of the battle raged on, but they seemed distant, muffled. He lay there, gasping for air, the world a kaleidoscope of pain. Then he heard it. the sound he both longed for and dreaded, the clear, piercing notes of a bugle. "Retreat." "No," he whispered, the word a dry rasp in his throat. He tried to call out, to shout his name, but his lungs wouldn't obey. He clawed at the dirt, trying to pull himself up the incline, his wounded legs screaming in protest. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through him. He could hear the thunder of hooves fading, the shouts of his comrades growing fainter. They were leaving, they were following the order. "He who falls, stays." The words echoed in his skull, a death knell played on a cracked bell. The general's cold, pragmatic face swam in his vision. He had been abandoned, left to bleed out alone in enemy territory. A bitter, profound despair washed over him, colder and sharper than the pain of his wounds. The sun beat down. The sounds of battle died away, replaced by the buzzing of flies and the whisper of the wind. His world narrowed to the throbbing of his own blood, and then, mercifully, faded to black. Hours later, or perhaps a lifetime, Little Sparrow moved through the tall grass near the ravine. Her name suited her. She was slight of build, but moved with a quick, observant grace, her dark eyes missing nothing. Her buckskin dress was soft and worn, adorned with simple quillwork she had done herself. In the woven basket on her back were the roots and leaves she had been gathering, yarrow to staunch bleeding, willow bark for fevers. The signs of the recent battle were everywhere: trampled earth, spent cartridges, and the faint grim smell of death on the wind. Her village had celebrated a victory, driving the soldiers back, but she knew that every victory came at a cost, and the bluecoats would always return. She was searching for a specific patch of sage one her grandmother had shown her, when a flicker of unnatural color caught her eye. Not the muted green of brush or the tan of dry earth, but a deep, dark blue, partially hidden in the thicket at the bottom of the ravine. Her heart gave a sharp, fearful thump. A soldier. Her first instinct was to flee. A living soldier was a danger beyond imagining. A dead one was a ghost to be avoided. She crouched behind a cluster of rocks, peering down. The man was lying unnaturally still, his face turned away from her, a dark, spreading stain soaking the dirt beneath his side. He was one of them. An enemy who had come to her land with a rifle and a flag, part of the tide that sought to sweep her people away. Every lesson of her life, every story told around the winter fire, screamed at her to leave him to the sun and the coyotes. She remained frozen for a long time, her hand resting on the small knife at her belt. He did not move. Perhaps he was already dead. Slowly, cautiously, she began to make her way down the slope, her moccasins silent on the loose rock. As she drew closer, she could hear him, a faint, ragged sound, a shallow breath that hitched and stuttered with pain. He was alive. She stood over him, her shadow falling across his body. She could see his face now, caked with dirt and dried blood. It was a strong face with a square jaw covered in dark stubble, but it was pale, drawn with agony, even in unconsciousness. He looked younger than she had expected. There were lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, lines of a deep weariness that had nothing to do with his wounds. He was not the faceless monster from the stories. He was just a man, bleeding his life away onto the earth of her home. An intense war raged within her. Her people, her family, had suffered at the hands of men in this uniform. Her own cousin had been killed in a raid just a season ago. Fear and hatred coiled in her stomach, demanding she turn her back. It was justice. It was survival. But then a softer voice, the voice of her grandmother who had taught her the way of the healing plants, whispered in her heart, "The Great Spirit does not make a distinction between a dying Lakota and a dying Wasichu. Life is life. To let it slip away when you can hold it back is to dishonor the gift." She knelt beside him, her fingers hesitating for a moment, before gently touching his forehead. He was burning with fever. His uniform was torn at the thigh and side, revealing grievous wounds that were crudely clotted and already beginning to fester. He would not last until morning. In that moment, a choice was made. It was a reckless, dangerous choice that could bring ruin upon her and her family if she were discovered. But looking at the helpless man at her feet, she could not see a soldier. She saw only a fellow human being balanced on the knife's edge between life and death. With a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, she set to work. She couldn't move him far, but she remembered a place, a small, hidden cave carved into the rock face, not 100 paces away, its entrance concealed by a thick curtain of wild vines. It would have to do. Getting him there was a grueling task. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone, She looped his arm over her shoulders, straining, half dragging, half carrying him. His head lolled against her, his fevered breath hot on her neck. Every few feet she had to stop, her own breath coming in ragged gasps, her muscles screaming in protest. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, when she finally pulled him through the vine-covered entrance and into the cool, dark shelter of the cave. He collapsed onto the dusty floor with a low groan. Panting, covered in his blood and her own sweat, Little Sparrow stood in the mouth of the cave, peering out at the darkening landscape. She had defied her fear, her anger, and her own people. She had brought the enemy into a secret fold of the earth. She had saved his life for now, and she had no idea what she would do next. A world of fractured light and shadow was the first thing to greet Arthur's return to consciousness. He was aware of a profound throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from his very bones, centered in the fiery torment of his leg and side. For a long moment, he drifted in a feverish haze, unsure if he was alive or dead, trapped in some purgatory of pain. A cool, damp cloth on his forehead brought a sliver of relief, a single point of clarity in the fog. He forced his heavy eyelids open. Hovering over him was a face framed by two long black braids, a woman's face, Lakota. Instinct, honed by years of conflict, screamed through him, enemy. He tried to lunge to get his hands on a weapon that wasn't there, but the movement sent a blinding sheet of agony through his body. A strangled groan was all he could manage before collapsing back onto the hard-packed earth. His teeth gritted against the pain. The woman drew back, her dark eyes wide, not with aggression, but with a cautious alarm. She held up her empty hands, a universal gesture of peace, and spoke soft, guttural words that he couldn't understand. He watched her, breathing heavily, his mind racing to make sense of the impossible situation. He was in a cave, a small, dark space that smelled of damp earth and herbs. His wounds. He twisted his head to look. His torn trousers had been cut away, and a thick, dark green poultice was packed into the gash on his thigh. His side was similarly bandaged with clean strips of what looked like buckskin. This woman, this supposed enemy, had not only found him, but had treated him. The thought was so contrary to his experience, so fundamentally illogical, that he could only assume it was a trap. They were keeping him alive for questioning or for some crueler purpose. The distrust was a physical thing, a cold knot in his stomach. For the next several days they existed in a state of tense, silent truce. Her name was Little Sparrow, though he would not learn that for some time. She would come and go as silently as a shadow, bringing him water in a clay bowl, changing his dressings with deft, surprisingly gentle hands, and leaving small portions of dried meat and berries for him to eat. He refused the food at first, certain it was poisoned, but hunger was a powerful persuader, and eventually he ate, his eyes never leaving her as he did. Communication was a clumsy dance of gestures and grunts. He would point to his wounds, his expression a question. She would respond with a quiet nod, her hands mimicking the act of grinding herbs. When his fever spiked, and nightmares of the ambush and his abandonment plagued his sleep, he would wake with a shout, his hands reaching for her throat, only to find her holding a bowl of cool water to his lips, her expression not of fear, but of a deep, weary pity. He didn't understand why she was helping him. She didn't understand why he looked at her with such raw hatred in his eyes, even as she saved his life. For Arthur, she was the face of the people who had killed his comrades. For Little Sparrow, he wore the uniform of the men who had burned villages and stolen the land of her ancestors. The chasm between them seemed too wide to ever be crossed. Meanwhile, in the bustling Lakota camp a mile away, Little Sparrow's frequent and lengthy absences had not gone unnoticed. Kitchi, a warrior whose face was set in a permanent scowl of grim resolve, watched her. He had seen too much to trust in the goodness of the world. Soldiers had killed his wife and son during a dawn raid 2 winters past, and the fire of that loss had forged his heart into something hard and unforgiving. He saw Little Sparrow returning to the village late, her basket of herbs fuller than necessary, a new exhaustion in her eyes that was not from her usual work. He saw her as soft, her heart too open to the world's cruelties. He feared her compassion would become a vulnerability, a crack in the village's defenses that the white man could exploit. "She spends too much time near the place of the battle," he said one evening to the other warriors sitting by the fire. "Her spirit is troubled, or she is hiding something." The others grunted in agreement, their own suspicions piqued. Back in the cave, a subtle shift was occurring. Arthur's fever had finally broken. With a clearer mind, his observations became sharper. He noticed the way she moved, with an economy of motion that spoke of both strength and grace. He saw the intricate quillwork on her moccasins, the care with which she prepared his dressings. This was not the work of a barbarian. This was the work of a skilled and patient healer. One afternoon, as she was rebandaging his leg, the pain was particularly sharp. He inhaled sharply, his fist clenching in the dirt. She paused, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a flicker of shared understanding, of empathy. On impulse, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and tapped his chest, then gestured to her. A clumsy attempt at thank you. She stared at his hand for a long moment, before a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She nodded once, a gesture of acceptance. It was a tiny thing, a single thread of connection woven across a battlefield of distrust. But it was a start. He was beginning to see the woman, Little Sparrow, and she, looking at his pain-racked, vulnerable form, was beginning to see the man, Arthur, separate from the blue wool of his uniform. The next morning, Kitchi's patience ran out. He saw Little Sparrow leave the village just after sunrise, her basket on her back, her steps aimed once again toward the ravine. This time he would know the truth. He moved through the trees like a ghost, his footfalls making no sound on the pine needles and dry earth. He kept a safe distance, a phantom trailing in her wake. He watched as she descended into the ravine where the soldier had fallen. But she didn't stop to gather plants. She moved with purpose toward a section of the rock wall that was draped in a thick curtain of wild vines. She glanced around one last time. Kitchi flattened himself behind a boulder, his heart pounding, and then she disappeared behind the leaves. A cold dread mixed with a surge of vindicated anger filled Kitchi's chest. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew what he would find. He waited for a count of 100, then drew the heavy blade from his belt and crept toward the vines. With a violent wrench, he tore the curtain of leaves aside. The sunlight streamed into the cave, illuminating the scene within. Little Sparrow was kneeling, offering a piece of dried fruit to the bluecoat soldier, who was propped up against the cave wall. The soldier looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. Little Sparrow gasped, scrambling to her feet, a look of pure terror on her face. For Kitchi, it was the ultimate betrayal, a woman of the people, nursing their sworn enemy back to health in secret. Venom filled his voice. He let out a sharp cry, not of attack but of alarm, a call that would carry to the ears of the nearest hunters. Arthur struggled to get to his feet, his mind screaming, but his body wouldn't obey. His leg buckled beneath him instantly. 2 more warriors appeared at the cave mouth behind Kitchi, their faces masks of disbelief hardening into fury. "Kitchi, no! Listen to me!" Little Sparrow pleaded, stepping between them and Arthur. But Kitchi shoved her aside, not with gentleness, but with the back of his arm. "You have brought a snake into our home, little sister," he snarled, his words dripping with contempt. "Now we will cut off its head." The warriors seized Arthur, hauling him roughly to his feet. The pain from his wounds was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the cold certainty that his improbable survival was about to come to a brutal end. They dragged him from the cave, out into the blinding sunlight. He stumbled, his weak legs barely supporting him, as they forced him on a grim march toward the Lakota village. Little Sparrow followed, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks, her desperate pleas lost on the wind. He was shoved into the center of the village, collapsing in the dust before a large teepee. People poured out of their homes, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was surrounded, a lone blue wolf in a sea of angry faces. A tall, imposing man with graying braids and eyes that held the wisdom of 100 winters emerged from the teepee. It was Chief Gall. He looked down at the wounded soldier, then at the distraught Little Sparrow, and finally at the triumphant, hate-filled face of Kitchi. Arthur, weak, wounded, and utterly alone, knew his life, which had been so unexpectedly given back to him, was now forfeit. The dust of the village center felt like a shroud, clinging to Arthur's sweat-soaked skin. He was on his knees, a position of utter vulnerability, surrounded by a circle of hard, unforgiving faces. The murmur of the Lakota language was a hostile sea of sound, lapping at the edges of his consciousness. He met the gaze of Chief Gall, a man whose authority needed no announcement. It was in the quiet set of his jaw, the deep lines of wisdom carved into his face, and the piercing intelligence of his eyes that seemed to see straight through Arthur's uniform and into the weary soul beneath. Kitchi stepped forward, his voice a blade sharpened by grief. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Arthur. "This is what they send us," he boomed, his voice resonating with a pain that was clearly shared by many in the crowd. "They send men in blue coats with rifles that spit fire. They promise peace on paper and bring war to our plains. They killed my wife. They shot my son as he ran. They burn our winter stores and drive the buffalo, our brothers, to the edge of the sky." He turned his furious gaze on Little Sparrow, who stood near the edge of the circle, her face ashen. "And you would give water to the viper that bit us. You would heal the wolf that slaughtered our lambs. There is no honor in this. There is only weakness." He faced Chief Gaul again, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "He wears the uniform of our destroyers. Justice demands his life. Avenge our dead. Let his blood water the ground his people have stolen. I demand it." A chorus of assent rippled through the crowd. The air grew thick with menace. Arthur braced himself, his jaw tight. He had faced death on the battlefield, but this felt different. This was a reckoning, a judgment not just on him but on his entire world. Then, to the astonishment of everyone, Little Sparrow moved. She walked from the edge of the circle and stood before the chief, placing herself directly between him and Arthur. She was trembling, but her voice, when it came, was clear and steady. "Kitchi speaks with the truth of a broken heart," she began, her words causing a hush to fall over the assembly. "And we have all felt the sting of that truth. But what justice is there in becoming what we hate?" She looked around at the faces of her people. The soldiers leave their wounded to die. They see no honor in caring for a fallen man. They see only an obstacle. Is that who we are? Will we kill a man who is too weak to stand, who was left for dead by his own kind? To kill him now is not the act of a proud warrior. It is the work of a scavenger. She turned her gaze to Kitchi, her eyes filled not with defiance but with a sorrowful plea. "Vengeance is a fire that burns the hand that holds it, Kitchi. My heart aches for your loss, but taking his life will not bring them back. It will only make us smaller. It will prove the Wasichu right when they call us savages." She looked back at Chief Gaul. "Let us show them what Lakota honor truly is. It is strength, yes, but it is also wisdom. It is knowing when to show mercy." The silence that followed was profound. Kitchi stared speechless at this young woman who had dared to challenge him with the very tenets of their culture. Chief Gaul stroked his chin, his dark eyes moving from Little Sparrow to Arthur, then to the faces in the crowd. He saw the fire of vengeance in some, but he also saw the seed of doubt that Little Sparrow's words had planted in others. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable weight that commanded absolute attention. "Little Sparrow speaks with a wisdom beyond her years, and Kitchi speaks with the righteous anger of our people. Both are true." He rose to his feet and walked slowly toward Arthur, circling him like a hawk assessing its prey. "Your people have caused us great pain, soldier," he said, the Lakota words flowing smoothly, translated for Arthur by a grim-faced elder standing nearby. "You are a symbol of that pain. By our law, Kitchi is right. Your life is forfeit." Arthur's heart sank. "But," the chief continued, holding up a hand, "by our honor, Little Sparrow is also right. To kill you now as you are is a deed without courage. It is not our way." He stopped directly in front of Arthur, looking down at him. "So, you will not die today, but your life is no longer your own. It belongs to the people. We will have a proof of honor." He gestured to the village around them. "You will work. Your hands, which were trained to kill, will learn to build. You will not carry a rifle. You will carry water for our elders. You will not form a skirmish line. You will help mend the corral for our horses. You will live among us, eat our food, and see the lives your army seeks to destroy. You will prove to us if there is a man beneath the blue coat, or only an enemy. Little Sparrow, you brought him into our world. You will be his guide. You will be his tongue. This is my judgment." A stunned silence gave way to a wave of murmurs. It was an unprecedented decision. Kitchi turned and stalked away, his face a mask of thunderous rage, but no one dared to openly defy the chief. And so began Arthur's new life. The first weeks were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and humiliation. He was given a small, worn teepee at the edge of the camp, away from the family circles. His work was hard, manual labor that his weakened body protested with every fiber. Under the ever-watchful, scornful eyes of Kitchi and his friends, he hauled buckets of water from the creek until his shoulders burned, and he chopped wood with an axe that felt impossibly heavy. Little Sparrow was his constant shadow, a quiet presence at his side. She would translate the instructions of the elders, her voice low and neutral. "Old Mother Hawk Feather needs her firewood stacked," she would say. "The fence on the west side of the horse pasture is broken. You are to fix it." Through their shared work, the silence between them began to fill with more than just instructions. He learned his first Lakota word, "wawangching," for patience, something he desperately needed. She learned an English word, "sorry," which he said one afternoon after accidentally startling her, and the sound of it seemed to hang in the air between them, full of unspoken meaning. He watched her, and a deep, burgeoning admiration took root in his heart. He saw the strength in her slender frame, the kindness she showed to the children and the elders, and the quiet dignity with which she bore the scorn of those who disapproved of her actions. She was ostracized by many, yet she never wavered. His own perspective was irrevocably shifting. He was no longer seeing the Lakota as a faceless enemy. He was seeing a community. He saw mothers singing lullabies to their children, old men telling stories by the fire, hunters returning with meat to share among all. He saw the devastating impact of his army's policies, the worry in their eyes when rations were low, the sorrow for the lands they had already lost. The black and white world of a soldier's duty was dissolving into 1,000 shades of grey. One evening, as he was using his old cavalry knife to repair a broken spoke on a travois, Little Sparrow sat nearby, grinding corn. He had been working for hours, his hands raw, but his focus absolute. He finished the work, fitting the mended spoke into place. It was a solid, clever repair. He looked up and found her watching him, a look of surprise and respect in her eyes. "You have skilled hands," she said, her English still halting but clear. "My father was a carpenter," he replied, the words feeling strange in his mouth. It was the first time he had spoken of his past. She nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing her features. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the sounds of the village settling in for the night, something profound passed between them. It was a spark of connection that went deeper than rescuer and survivor, deeper than guard and prisoner. It was the recognition of two souls, each lonely in their own world, finding a fragile common ground. He realized with a jolt that his survival was no longer just about staying alive. It was about her. He looked at Little Sparrow, at the way the firelight danced in her dark eyes, and he knew that his disobedience to his general had not just saved his life. It had led him to a place and a person he never could have imagined, and his heart was becoming irrevocably entangled in this new, forbidden life. The season had turned. The brutal heat of summer had softened into the golden melancholy of autumn. The cottonwoods along the creek blazed yellow against the deep blue sky, and a crispness in the air spoke of the coming cold. Arthur no longer felt like a prisoner. The stares of suspicion had largely been replaced by a quiet acceptance, and in some cases, genuine respect. He had worked tirelessly, his hands now calloused and strong in a way they never were from holding a rifle. He had learned the rhythms of the village, the cadence of the language, and the deep abiding strength of the people he had once called his enemy. His heart, however, had learned only one rhythm, the one that beat in time with Little Sparrow's. Their love was a quiet, powerful force, an unspoken truth that bloomed in shared glances across the fire, in the brush of their hands as he took a tool from her, in the way she would bring him a cup of water at the end of a long day's work. It was a love born in a crucible of pain and distrust, and it was stronger for it. He was no longer just the man she had saved, he was Arthur, and she was no longer just his healer, she was the anchor of his new life. One afternoon, as he helped her scrape a buffalo hide stretched on a wooden frame, their silence was comfortable, complete. He paused, looking at her, at the intense focus in her dark eyes, the stray wisp of black hair that had fallen across her cheek. He had an overwhelming urge to reach out and tuck it behind her ear. He had abandoned one life, one world, and in its place he had found everything that mattered. The peace was shattered by the frantic drumming of hooves. A scout, his horse lathered in sweat, galloped into the center of the village, shouting a single terrifying word that Arthur now understood all too well. "Soldiers!" A wave of panic rippled through the camp. Women gathered their children, their faces tight with fear. Warriors grabbed their rifles and bows, their expressions hardening into grim masks of defiance. Arthur's blood ran cold. He scrambled to the top of a small bluff at the edge of the village and squinted at the horizon. It was them, a column of blue, at least 30 strong, moving with the relentless, disciplined pace of a predator. They were not a patrol. The tight formation, the grim purpose in their movement, This was a punitive expedition. They were coming for revenge. He felt Little Sparrow's presence beside him. She stood there, her hand gripping his arm, her knuckles white. He could feel her trembling. "They have come to finish what they started," she whispered, her voice laced with a despair that tore at his soul. In that moment, Arthur was split in two. A part of him, the soldier, recognized the tactics, the inevitability of the coming slaughter. The other part, the man who had found a home here, felt the terror of the people around him as his own. He was confronted with the impossible choice he had been dreading. He could stand with the Lakota, take up a rifle and fire on the uniform he once wore, becoming a traitor in the eyes of his country and a killer of men who were once his brothers. He could stand aside, a coward, and watch as this village, as she, was wiped from the earth. Or he could reveal himself, step out onto the plain and announce his survival, an act that would surely doom them all, branding them as hostile captors. His mind raced, a chaotic storm of duty, love and fear. He looked at Little Sparrow's terrified face, and the chaos stilled. There was no choice. There was only her. A third path, a desperate, razor-thin path, was the only one he could take. He turned and strode purposefully toward the center of the village where Chief Gall was issuing orders. "Chief Gall!" he called out, his voice strong and clear. The old chief turned, his eyes questioning. Kitchi stood beside him, a rifle in his hand, his face a grim sculpture of hate-filled resolve. "Let me go to them," Arthur said, his words tumbling out. "I will speak with them. This is not a battle you can win. They come with vengeance in their hearts. But perhaps I can reason with them." Kitchi let out a harsh laugh. "Reason? You would reason with the whirlwind? He is a traitor. He will save his own skin and lead them right to us." "No," Arthur said, meeting Kitchi's glare without flinching. "My life is here now. I am not that man anymore." He turned back to the chief, his gaze pleading. "I was one of them. I know how they think. I know their codes. Please let me try. It is the only chance we have." Chief Gall studied Arthur's face for a long, silent moment. He saw the desperation, but he also saw a core of integrity, an honor that was not of a soldier but of a man protecting his home. He glanced at Little Sparrow, who was watching, her heart in her eyes. The chief gave a slow, solemn nod. "Go," he said. "May the Great Spirit guide your tongue." Arthur took a deep breath. From his meager belongings, he retrieved what was left of his cavalry neckerchief, a faded piece of yellow cloth. It wasn't a white flag, but it would have to do. He walked out of the village alone onto the vast open plain. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on his back, but he looked only forward, toward the inexorable blue line. The column halted. A single rider detached himself and trotted forward. He was young, an officer by his insignia, with a confident, almost arrogant set to his shoulders. He reined in his horse a dozen paces from Arthur, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "I am Lieutenant Frank," the officer said, his voice sharp and suspicious. "Who in God's name are you? You look like a deserter." "I was Sergeant Arthur Bernard," Arthur replied, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Of the 7th Cavalry. I was with the patrol that was ambushed here a season ago." The lieutenant's eyes widened in disbelief. "Bernard, you were listed as killed in action." "I was left for dead, Lieutenant." "On the direct orders of General Chester." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, were liberating. "My comrades retreated and left me to bleed out in a ravine." Frank's expression faltered. He knew of the general's controversial order. "I would be bones in the dust right now," Arthur continued, his voice ringing with a conviction Frank could not ignore. "If not for the people in that village. A woman, a healer, found me. She risked her own safety to save an enemy soldier. Her chief, a man of more honor than many I've served under, spared my life and taught me what it means to earn it. I am not their prisoner, Lieutenant. I am their guest. And I am telling you, if you attack this village, you are not attacking warriors. You are attacking families. You are attacking the very people who showed a mercy our own army refuses to." He told him everything. The pain, the fever, Little Sparrow's care, the chief's judgment, the life he had built. He spoke not as a soldier to an officer, but as one man to another, a plea for sanity in a world gone mad. Lieutenant Frank listened, his initial hostility melting away into a stunned confusion. This was not in the field manual. This story of honor and mercy from the savages he'd been sent to punish directly contradicted his orders and everything he'd been taught. He was an ambitious man, but he was not a cruel one. He looked past Arthur to the village, seeing not a military target but a collection of homes, smoke curling peacefully from their tops. "What do you propose, Sergeant?" Frank asked, his voice softer now. A truce, Arthur said. Let me bring Chief Gall to speak with you, man to man. See for yourself the honor you are being sent to destroy. After a moment of tense deliberation, Frank agreed. A parley was held on the plain between the two forces. Chief Gall spoke with a quiet, powerful dignity that impressed the young lieutenant far more than any display of aggression could have. In the end, a fragile understanding was reached. Lieutenant Frank, a man of principle caught in a difficult position, made a decision. He would report that his unit had engaged a small band of hostiles who had scattered into the mountains. He would also confirm with great regret the death of Sergeant Arthur Bernard, whose remains had been discovered and buried where he fell. He would give Arthur what he most desired, a death on paper and the freedom to live. As the cavalry column turned and rode away, disappearing over the horizon, a collective sigh of relief went through the village. Arthur stood on the bluff, the yellow neckerchief still clutched in his hand. He was no longer Sergeant Bernard. That man had died in the ravine. He was just Arthur. Little Sparrow came to stand beside him. She said nothing but slipped her hand into his. He intertwined his fingers with hers, the familiar feel of her touch a comforting anchor. He had disobeyed an order to survive, and in doing so he had lost a country, a uniform, and a name. But he had found a home. He had found a people. He had found a truer honor, not in a general's command, but in the quiet courage of a compassionate heart. He looked down at the woman beside him, his little Sparrow, and knew he was at long last exactly where he was meant to be. True honor is not found in blind obedience to orders, but in the courage to follow one's conscience. It teaches us that compassion is a bridge that can cross any divide, and sometimes by losing the life we thought we knew, we find the one we were always meant to live. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to confirm your subscription and leave a like. It helps us a lot.